Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start sharing some slides in a minute, but welcome to our webinar, where we're going to be talking about some of the latest trends in women's health, sharing with you some of our data. We're really excited to do this. As a scientist, we usually have a limited audience for our research findings, and when we actually view fertility and our approach to things, it's not how we want it to be, where you're only speaking among the people who are already in the field and who are already informed. You're actually speaking to the people who are here to learn and to know more. We're in a very privileged position in that we have one of the largest data sets there is, that is collating data that is real world data, up to date on people in their day-to-day lives, you, me, not the older data sets that were collected previously. So I'm really happy to be able to share some of this information with you. We have, at Fertility, we have spent the last 4 years building this company. We have been doing so by running clinical trials, collating the latest information and data, peer-reviewed literature, up-to-date resources, so that we're actually using relevant information, not outdated studies. And actually, when we started to put together all of the relevant things that we felt necessary in our health assessment to ask you, we realized that many of the studies that we wanted to use to leverage as information, to give more information, just were really not good enough. They had very poor numbers of participants. Their methods weren't exactly great. And so we really took it upon ourselves to just start from the beginning and start collecting the data and creating the data that is needed. So 4 years on, almost to the day that we incorporated, we are really proud to say that we have not only informed so many of you, but also that we've helped so many people. Fertility actually didn't start as fertility. It started as a research clinical trial, one that we got approval for to recruit women with this very optimistic goal of recruiting women from different gynae clinics so that we could ask them some questions, take some blood, see if there were any overlaps between these women so that we could start to generate or build out predictive models for different gynecological pathologies. Why this was important to us is that coming from a world of a data-first approach to diagnostics, which is genetics. I'm a molecular geneticist and lecturer in reproductive and molecular genetics at University College London. And so my research always was underpinned by huge amounts of genomic data. And we would never even dream of assuming that one gene had a function in a pathology without comparing large amounts of data from a lot of people, exploring the whole genome. And so it really surprised me as a geneticist and a scientist, and as a woman, it disappointed me that we don't use the same standards when it comes to women. We still have this, how does it look, how does it feel type of approach to diagnosing conditions. And coming from the genomics world, we have cures for some of the most rare genetic conditions, which is amazing. But we don't even have answers for some of the most common women's health conditions, let alone cures. And many of these conditions are still being described with lazy terminology like they are elusive conditions, and we just don't have the data. And to me, that's just not good enough. We are living in a digital first world where we as individuals are constantly consuming, delivering, giving and getting data, and we are tech savvy. We're also an intelligent generation of women who want to know more and expect a little bit more knowledge when it comes to things. When you grow up with information at your fingertips and you have all of the information that you could possibly dream, in the palm of your hands to look up the answers to, it seems absolutely crazy that some of the most fundamental questions about our own bodies, we don't have the answers to. And in fact, some of the most fundamental knowledge that we really do need to know as women, as people with ovaries, about our menstrual cycles, about our menstrual patterns, about what's normal, what's not normal, is just not there. And we're not taught this at school, unfortunately. And what we hear time and time again is people either saying, why aren't we taught this at school? or I wish I knew. So we've really made it our mission to help people to know. So when I say we started with a clinical trial, an ambitious plan to build predictive algorithms, it was because when we looked at the current system, which is that patient-doctor interface, which is amazing and everybody needs it, it's also flawed when it comes to women's health and gynecological health, because you're in a very disadvantaged position when you're sitting in front of a stranger asking, being asked questions about your sex life, your menstrual patterns, your bowel movements, your symptoms, your psychology, if they ask. And this is a stranger, and you have to give details that are quite intimate around all of those details. And so very often we often, and the kind of public rhetoric is that the doctors aren't prescribing, or the doctors aren't diagnosing, and they're not getting it right. And so often the blame and the emphasis lies on blaming the doctor. And from our standpoint, I think there's two people to blame in that transaction, and neither really to blame in truth. One, you have to rely on a doctor asking you all of the relevant questions in a very short amount of time. In your typical at least NHS appointment, you have on average 9 minutes. That's really not enough time, even if you were to start and not stop asking questions and answering questions in a really timed manner. It's not enough time to ask you all the relevant questions, nor is it time for you to answer all the relevant questions. So we assume that the practitioner is getting all of the relevant information that they need in order to diagnose us or to prescribe us for something to help us. But the reality is there's insufficient information coming from both sides. And that's part of the flaw, is that we need to build a proper way of triaging patients so that when you come to them, they have a body of information. And that's really how we viewed our health assessment for fertility. So when we wanted to recruit women from these clinics, we thought we could gather as much information as possible. Now, in retrospect, actually, we would have been sitting in a lot of clinics for a very long time. And it was a strange benefit to us that, though it was disappointing at the time, that lockdown hit just as we were given permission and ethics approval to recruit women in clinic. And it meant that all non-essential clinics were closed and shut down. Now, unfortunately, non-essential seems to be almost all of the gynae clinics. The only clinic that remained open during that time was colposcopy, so suspected cancer screening. So we really didn't feel comfortable recruiting women from those clinics. And so what we did was we created a website, and we simply asked people very little information, very little. We had no money, obviously. So this was a self-made website. And we just simply asked women, do you want to know about your hormones or fertility? Do you want to know about your reproductive health? And we had such an overwhelming amount of women who registered their interest. In fact, we had over 7,000 women register their interest, that we thought, you know what, maybe this isn't just us. Maybe it's not just the burning question in the back of our minds, and the fact that we live in somewhat of an echo chamber, being in academia and being researchers and scientists who study this for a living and lecture about fertility and infertility for a living. I certainly felt this personal amount of just wonder all the time, and fear, because I think when you are lecturing about age-related fertility decline in your 30s, and you're speaking about this graph, which essentially is the most depressing graph ever, because it shows that we have all these eggs, that we're born with all the eggs we'll ever have, and that over time that's slowly and steadily starts to fall. But when you reach your 30s, it's in free fall. And it's a really horrible thing, feeling so out of control, and thinking, why are we not better prepared about this sooner? And the analogy I guess I give for it is that we're all taught from an early age about finances. You have a bank card, or you have a bank account, or you have a physical amount of money in your pocket, and you know that you cannot go out shopping and buy a whole load of things if you don't have the finances to do so. And that's a pretty simple equation that we're brought up to take on board. And yet when it comes to our fertility, we are now being told as women that we need to have careers, jobs. Well, we're not just told, we actually do. In current societal expectations are pretty burdensome on women, from an economic point of view, if nothing else. And going to university and the years creeping back even more means that it's now almost the average age to have a first child in your 30s, where, 10, 20, 30 years ago, you were considered much older to do that. It was expected that you would get married and settle down. Now, I'm grateful for the progress that we have made in terms of our ability to be independent, and in terms of our ability to have careers and lives beyond marriage. But the lesson that still has not remained is that we need to be mindful of our fertility. And what we've learned is that it's not just about fertility. Irrespective of your desire to have children or not, you really should check in with your body and understand your hormones, because unfortunately, part of the rhetoric clinically is that if you're too young or you're not interested in having children just yet, it doesn't really matter. If you're too old or you've already had your children, it doesn't really matter. And so there's this horrible overemphasis on the fact that our reproductive systems only matter if we're trying to conceive or we're having children. And in fact, our reproductive systems and our organs and the hormones that they produce from our brain, our ovaries, our pituitary, are quite literally the things that keep us going. They control our mood, as we know, our weight, our metabolism, our sleep, our skin, our sex drive, you name it. There is not one element of your life that isn't governed by our hormones. And yet, at any given time, very few of us know anything to do with our hormones or where they're currently at. So we've started asking some of the relevant questions that we need to know outside of the realms of just having children, because a lot of the data on women's health or fertility in particular has been taken from IVF clinics. So they've got large bodies of data on women who have gone through IVF, and that to me is a skewed data set. It's not the data set that's reflective of an entire population of women from 18 to 50. And that's what we really want to see, is when we start to look at some of the data, so often their reference ranges are pretty wide. So what is normal? Who knows what's normal for you, unless you start to take into account all of the other aspects of your life. When we built our health assessment, we asked a lot of professionals, what would you ask in clinic? We asked fertility experts. I have some amazing colleagues and friends who gave us their time and expertise, and they believed in what we were doing, and they supported us in giving us information about what they would do in their day-to-day practice. And that's essentially how we started building out this health assessment, because so much of our fertility and reproductive health is determined by our day-to-day lives, our diet, our symptoms, and our menstrual patterns. And so that's just some of the information that we've put into this health assessment. Now, what's pretty cool, I had to be held back in terms of the questions that I wanted to ask. I never stop asking questions. I mean, I'm questioning, what shampoo do people use? Do people use different products? Because all of these have these chemicals that we're now reading about that do have an effect on our reproductive health. But the first iteration of the health questionnaire, or the virtual health assessment that we asked everybody, had to be long enough that we could ask enough questions that we could get a diagnosis, but not so long that you would be bored and drop off. And so that sweet spot came from us really being critical about what questions we needed to include. And so what we did was we took all of the international diagnostic criteria and guidelines for the most common gynecological pathologies that could lead to a reduced fertility, whether it was POI, polycystic ovaries, fibroids, endometriosis, hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is when your periods stop due to either poor nutrition or too much exercise, which is very prevalent. So we took all of the different diagnostic criteria. And the reason I say there's different ones is that there are many different governing bodies when it comes to guidelines around women's health, and the different guidelines that clinicians use in order to diagnose somebody, they have pretty much like a checklist. So they'll say, according to the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, if you have this condition, this symptom, and this hormone result, you are more likely to have this pathology. And but there are many different bodies. So there's the American Society, there's the NICE guidelines, there's the European Society. So we took, some of them are overlapping, but some of them have different symptoms that they look out for. So in order not to miss anything, we took every single one of them and we embedded them within this health assessment to essentially create an algorithm that enabled us to collate every single relevant piece of information, not just about symptoms, but about your lifestyle, about your exercise frequency, about your diet, so that we could start to learn what the important things were for diagnosing somebody for a different condition, so that we could flag whether somebody might be at risk of having a reduced fertility. We really wanted to make sure that this was all weighted in proper evidence. So any of the other conditions, any of the other features that were associated with hormone imbalance were also included using evidence-based guidelines and literature. So what this has amounted in is an awful lot of people who have done this virtual health assessment. The bit I'm excited about is version 2, which is at 50% rollout now. And this is basically double the length, because what we've seen is that actually people are really willing to tell us more, and that there are far more questions that we still need to know in order to help people get to the root cause of reduced fertility or needing a diagnosis. And what we see is that so many people will go through for, will be struggling to conceive, will go through for fertility treatment, and they're never once asked about the key determinants of their life that could be reducing their fertility in the first place. And so unfortunately, the fertility industry, and it is an industry, doesn't work off the premise of helping you to not be infertile. It works off the premise of treating you. And fertility treatment doesn't actually treat you. It helps you to try have a baby, but it doesn't actually cure your underlying infertility. So if you need to conceive a second time, you haven't been treated, you still need IVF. And so one of our missions is to reduce the prevalence of infertility, which is 1 in 7 individuals or heterosexual couples are infertile, and to reduce that number so that maybe we can get to the stage where only 1 in 50 are infertile. And I think this is entirely achievable through better education and informing and equipping women with information about their bodies at a much earlier age. So I'm going to share a little bit about our test and what we're doing. Now, we created this report because over the last year, we have been very excited to present our research at clinical and scientific conferences, both nationally and internationally. We have given talks, over 20 different talks at these conferences. I've given over 20 different talks at these conferences, which is amazing. But the audience isn't the one that necessarily needs to know this information. It's great for them to learn and to know and to update facts. But the reality is the people who we collected this information for, the people we endeavor and strive to help every single day are you. You are the people who have given us your information, who have turned to us for help, who have trusted us to educate you. And it's all very fine publishing things in scientific journals, but none of you will read it there. Where you'll read it, we hope, is in this reproductive report. And this is going to be the first of many reports that we will produce. We hope to have an annual report that we publish every single year, where we share every bit of information with you. We bring you with us on the journey. To me, when we talk about clinical trials seems so clinical. And yet, to me, the way that clinical trials should be driven is side by side, by a patient-led experience. And so that is what we aim to do by sharing everything as we know it with you, so that hopefully lives can be improved as we go. So we are on a mission to do this, to make healthcare not so hostile, to go and meet you on the streets, to be seen and heard, to start bringing conversations about reproductive health into the everyday conversations, so that we are not hiding behind embarrassing situations. Quite literally, everywhere I go, People share their stories with me, and that is an unbelievable privilege, because what it means is that people are willing to actually share some of their most intimate things. But I don't want that to be intimate. I want it to be part of the normal conversation. I don't want people to speak about these things in lowered voices, because what I've witnessed is that when one person shares in a group, the second, the third, the fourth, and then everybody is talking about their experiences, because there is not one of us who doesn't have a story. And so we want to be the voice for everybody. We want to be the amplifier to share these stories and to make change, and a very necessary change that is needed in healthcare today. So we are backing you as women with wanting to know more about your own bodies. So first of all, just a little bit about the life cycle of fertility and why it matters, what we're building, and why all of these things matter so much to us, and how it matters that we're really close to the data. I think a lot of companies sit on data for no good. And for us, the whole point of us collecting information about this was so that we could make change. One of the first things that we've seen is that some of the known guidelines for diagnosing conditions actually really aren't that powerful. And so we want to rewrite some of those guidelines so that people are getting a diagnosis much sooner. In fact, we've just written a bit of a critique on one of the guidelines for reproductive conditions, and that is because a guideline, a massive body of information came out, and it was a consensus-led guideline. And what that means is they get all of the experts in one room, and then they all decide what they think is most important. And when I read this, what I noticed was that not once in that entire enormous guideline for diagnosing these conditions, many conditions, not once did they mention the word patient, and not once did they mention the word data. And to me, if you're not talking to the patient and hearing it, then you're not listening at all, and nothing actually gets changed. And so we've actually seen this when we asked 1,000 women who had PCOS. We said, what were your experiences? What led you to a diagnosis? How long did it take you? What are your symptoms? What were the symptoms that triggered you to finally say, I need help? And what we realized was that the number one symptoms that are listed on the guidelines weren't actually the number one symptoms that patients complained of. The number one symptom actually that people with PCOS complained of was anxiety. And yet nowhere in any one of the guidelines does it mention how we counsel a patient, how we deal with the mental anxiety that is associated with a reproductive condition. Because what do we do in medicine? We like to separate things. This is in one box and this is another. You speak to one doctor for one thing and one for another, but it shouldn't be that way. It should be that we understand the associated symptoms of conditions and deal with the patient as a person. Anyway, this is the life cycle of fertility. And the reason I wanted to point out this is that I've spoken a little bit about the online health assessment. So starting here with this very comprehensive questionnaire that enables us to, number one, get you to a diagnosis sooner, or to understand a little bit more about you, so that when we do test you, we can actually put your results into context. So when we send your test to you, nobody gets the same test. You will get a test depending on the set of questions that you have been that you have answered. So if the set of answers that you give are indicative of polycystic ovaries or polycystic ovary syndrome, we will test your androgens, as well as your cycling hormones, as well as your thyroid hormones, as well as your ovarian reserve. So when people talk about fertility tests and not being fertility, and there being no true fertility test, I agree. There is no one test of your fertility, unfortunately, unless you plan on trying to have sex unprotected and see if you get pregnant. That's fine if you're trying to conceive, but if you're not trying to conceive and you're just curious, that's a difficult, not so convenient test. So what we wanted to take into account was not just ovarian reserve or AMH, as everybody talks about it, but all of the other possible things. For example, if you've had a previous infection, that might lead to blocked fallopian tubes. And so we actually ask you the number of times you may have had a previous infection of chlamydia and gonorrhea. Furthermore, we then want to be able to actually give you results that are explained in context. So the personalized results we've currently coded over 54,000 clinical scenarios. And what that means is that we've tried to take into account every possible combination of symptoms and hormone results. And that's why it's taken us 4 years to get to where we are, and we're still not there. We still want to keep learning and doing better. But the results are essentially broken up into all of the different sections. And so this is our opportunity, and same with the health assessment, to educate. So for every question we ask, if you're not sure as to why we've asked it, we will qualify. So we will say, for STIs, for example, 1 in 4 will have a sexually transmitted infection at some point in their life. So there's no shame there. And they can lead to a reduced fertility. So we're trying to educate people as to why we're asking these questions along the journey. And then for the results, it will, for every single hormone we test, we answer, what is it? What does it mean for you? And why have we tested it? And I think that's a really important rationale. Some places where you can get tests, you will literally just get the name of the hormone or the name of the blood result and a reference range saying your FSH was 12 out of a reference range of 8 to 16 picomoles per milliliter. And it really doesn't mean too much to you. So we really endeavor to put this into context. And then downstream from that, we've really wanted to make sure that we have ongoing support and care. The first person we actually brought on was a counsellor, because if you don't get results about your fertility or ovarian reserve that you're happy with, we wanted there to be counselling to let you know there are many other reproductive avenues beyond just the typical routes. So with that, we've built out an amazing team of experts and clinicians that you can book in to have a teleconsult with. We wanted to ensure we had somebody from endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, people, reproductive health experts, endocrinologists, fertility experts. And so that beyond just speaking to somebody, I think what we really want is to make everyone part of this community of care. And what I'm hoping for tonight is that you'll also be part of our community of research. So until now, as you know, accurate data on women's health hasn't existed. Women have been left in the dark and had no choice but to make uninformed decisions about their bodies. And this is ongoing. When we know that clinical trials have been built excluding women, and many people launch in saying the outrage that women were not included in clinical trials until 1993. I mean, the first instance of that actually started with animal studies. All studies start with animal studies, and female mice weren't included in even the preliminary clinical trials. So what we see is that not a single element of our current clinical and pharmaceutical system has been built with the female physiology in mind. And this is, for obvious reasons, very serious. But when we actually break it down and we look at every single organ in the female body, our kidneys process things very differently. What that means is our kidney and our liver compounds will stick around for a lot longer because it takes them longer to process things, including alcohol, including the drugs that we take, including pharmaceutical drugs. These are all going to be processed very differently in a female body. Our brains are different. Our lungs are different. We are quite literally, every square inch of us is made of cells that have 2 X chromosomes. And that makes a big difference to us. And for reasons that we have fully not explored, we are now failing in diagnosing women and treating women according to those principles of research. So our reproductive report really is founded on the premise that we believe that it shouldn't be a mystery. We believe that research starts with us, but the data is something that comes from honesty, and that a one-sided approach to medicine does not lead to a conversational approach where we start learning from each other. And I'll give you a really funny example of where it really hammered that into my head. I remember reading on a forum, it was in an app, and people were talking about, different pains, and there was lots of different threads on this forum about reproductive health. And one of them, somebody had simply asked, does anyone get that strange bum pain during their period? Forgive me for saying that. There's actually this, I don't even need an apology. We're upfront about everything. And there was like 20,000 responses. And I'd never heard of this because I'd never experienced it. And I started Googling it, and I thought, this is something that is not really talked about, certainly not asked about. And yet here were thousands of women saying the same thing, which was, oh my God, I thought it was just me. And how many of us have thought, oh my God, I just thought it was just me, and kept some of these strange or wonderful or maybe abnormal symptoms to ourselves. So we wanted our report to just make everyone feel normal, to start sharing some of the trends, some of the norms, and some of the data that we've seen after looking at thousands and thousands of women. So our report is beautiful, and it will be launched tomorrow. Please do download it and read it. It is, firstly, I want to say that our incredible team of data scientists and scientific researchers have just been incredible in rallying together all of the data from the last year. The report is based on 122,665 women. This is a number, but I want you to remember these are individual lives and individual people. That is the most important thing to me that I remember every single day, that these are people for whom they have looked for information. And so that overwhelming feeling we got when we put together a website and we had all of these people trickling in to ask, to register their interest, seeing this is to me proof of what we fundamentally believed, that we need more information and we need somewhere to turn to ask questions about our body. It's also very satisfying when we think of how many male investors said, is there a market for that? So when we talk about a reproductive, actually we're trying to talk about, we tried to coin the phrase being reproductive, and essentially to be proactive or productive about your reproductive health. So when we look at some of the people who are part of this, they are part of our reproductive revolution. So just starting, we have 4 what we initially called our reproductive rants, but actually they're revelations, that we need to do something about. And it's all very fine stating the problem, but we want to be part of the solution. So the first thing we've realized, which is very obvious, is that we need new data on women's reproductive health. So when we talk about a classic period cycle or menstrual cycle, which is between 28 and 35 days, many of the period tracking apps are actually set on a 28-day cycle. And research did come out before saying that not all women have a 28-day cycle. But why this is important is that if nearly 70% of users do not have a 28-day cycle, but all of the textbook and app-based information around how we predict our cycles, and also how we predict when ovulation occurs. So the textbook answer is that we ovulate on day 14. But if nearly 70% of people don't have a 28-day cycle, well, then they're not ovulating on day 14. And so there's a lot of people who are timing their intercourse in order to achieve a pregnancy, if they're trying to conceive, at the wrong time. We also see quite a high number of individuals who have a previous diagnosis of polycystic ovary syndrome, so above the actual stated number of individuals who do have PCOS. And again, when we look at this, this is also incredible information around how we can better support women who have PCOS. The most amazing thing to me is how we are so unbelievably strong as individuals. So 81% of our users experience 1 or more symptoms. Now, you might think people are coming to fertility because there's something wrong. So it stands to reason that they're testing because they want to find answers. So obviously, more of them will have symptoms. That's not true. We ask at the very beginning of the fertility journey or the health assessment, what brings you here? And we ask currently 4 questions. We say, are you actively trying to conceive? Are you experiencing symptoms? Are you planning for the future? Or are you just curious about your reproductive health? And so we have a really nice breakdown of those who are just curious about their reproductive health, who aren't experiencing symptoms. And we have, when we list the many symptoms that are associated with our reproductive health, what's interesting to us is that those who say they're just curious are still experiencing, on average, 5 symptoms. And so what that means is that we carry this burden in the absence of the knowledge that actually these are symptoms that could be indicative of a diagnosis. It stands to reason that those who come to us saying they are experiencing symptoms have on average 7 or 8 symptoms. Well, what's crazy is that they are not actually approaching care until they have 7 or 8 symptoms that are quite life-limiting symptoms, but that we as women are taught to just get on with and are told on a daily basis are just normal. One thing that shocked me, or maybe it didn't, was that a fifth of us experience pain during intercourse. And yet there is no information around how we better educate couples, men, people in relationships about the fact that that's not normal, nor should it be the case for individuals. And part of opening up the conversation around reproductive health is to really have these conversations about pain during intercourse, about our symptoms. When we ask, have you ever been diagnosed with a condition? We list a lot of different conditions that people can give us information about. But one of the answers is simply, no, I haven't been diagnosed, but I suspect something's up. And when somebody says this, that they haven't been diagnosed, but suspect something is up, 90% of the time, they have at least one out of range hormone, or something is significantly up, or they have a diagnosis. And that's unbelievable as a powerful prognostic indicator for when something is up. Just not feeling like yourself, feeling like something is up. And yet, how many of us have gone to receive help when we just don't feel ourselves and been pretty much dismissed or laughed at? So our second reproductive revelation is that mothers-to-be need to be supported with robust preconception lifestyle advice. When we look at the information of those women who are actively trying to conceive, 8.6% of those who are trying to conceive are still using recreational drugs. That to me is shocking, that we still have this assumption that, and I'm not preaching, I'm really not, but we do have an assumption that when the clock starts as soon as you're pregnant, you have to start being good as soon as you're pregnant. And yet all of the literature, going back as far as we can find it, supports the fact that preconception, so the months prior to getting pregnant, the things that we eat, the things that we do, our lifestyle, our exposures, significantly impact the health of the babies that would be born. So treating our bodies like this unbelievable temple that they are, that are about to receive this unbelievable gift, which is life, that we should be cautious about the things that we are doing during that time, because we are planning our bodies for that. But our eggs are being prepared during that time too. So 45% of people actively trying to conceive were drinking alcohol. And you might say, sure, you might have one or two drinks, but actually nearly 5% of those were drinking way above the NHS guidelines for a healthy adult, which is 14 units per week. And so again, the research shows that the time in your cycle that you drink actually significantly impacts your chance of conceiving. So if you are drinking in any monthly cycle, if you're drinking at the start, in the first half of the cycle, your follicular phase, when basically all of the would-be eggs and the follicles in your ovaries are starting to prepare, if you're drinking during that time, you're really not doing them any favors. And so they are less likely to ovulate and result in a healthy pregnancy. However, if you drink in the latter half of your cycle, so during your period and just before your period, you're much more likely to experience depression. So these are some of the things that we get constant, and the reason I really promise I am not preaching, but we see constant conflicting evidence, whether it's in the headlines, it feels like there isn't a week that goes by that we don't see a headline that says it's okay to drink one glass of wine. It's okay. There's no evidence that is suggested about drinking during pregnancy. And I think unless we start to view our bodies as being quite sacred when it comes to that journey into conception, we're not going to really learn. But also it's understandable that people read these headlines and they read the bit that they really want to hear. It's like when I read that chocolate is good for you, I'm like, great, let's keep going. 28% of women trying to conceive either smoke regularly or occasionally. We think of smoking and drinking as being these kind of catch-all pieces of advice to individuals, like stop drinking, stop smoking, have a healthy weight. But what's more important about those pieces of advice is that they're not generic pieces of advice to be more broadly healthier. Smoking significantly alters your hormone profile. And we see this in our results, that those who smoke have a higher incidence of endometriosis, those who smoke have higher out of range individual hormones. Those who drink also have their hormones affected. These things actually do affect the hormones that we really rely on in order to have a healthy pregnancy. And then 55% of women trying to conceive are not exercising consistently or at all. And again, we know that healthy exercise is really important, especially in maintaining just a better, better reproductive outcome. So we have all of the studies also look to maternal health and the importance of, preparing your body for what is a marathon. I always will compare pregnancy to a marathon, and I think starting pregnancy as if it's the start line is like showing up to a marathon and thinking, I'm going to be able to run this without any training. I think our bodies should be put to training, and that we should be really treating them quite carefully. Okay, rant over, I promise. Revelation, it's not a rant. Our third revelation was that women trying to conceive need to get to specialist care sooner. One of the things that we constantly get pushback on is that people say, just go to the NHS. And yet the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists came out with a report saying nearly over 500,000 women are waiting to be seen by a gynecological specialist. Over 500,000 women are waiting almost a year to see somebody, and they can't see somebody on the NHS. They have to go privately. Some of the private clinicians on our team have said, I've had people come down to London from Manchester because they cannot get to see somebody sooner. There's then the emphasis on being eligible for NHS funded treatment. I am all for supporting women to go through the NHS to get results that they need. The purpose of fertility, is hopefully all of you would see from today, is not that we would create a system outside of a well-working system. The system is not working well in order to prevent some of the most common occurrences in age-related fertility decline. The NHS will not test AMH, which is a marker of ovarian reserve. They will also not refer you for treatment until you've been actively trying to conceive for 12 to 24 months. This is a problem. If you're not going to be referred for treatment within the amount of time that you probably could really catch that boat, then you do need to know sooner. Now, the statistics will say that this is because many people will conceive naturally within 1 year. However, in the absence of knowledge about whether you have a condition, whether you have a hormone imbalance, or whether you are, whether there's something wrong, that's a very big guess. That's a lot of guesswork. That's a long time to wait to find out that actually something is wrong. And so we actually took it upon us to look at the data. Now, in the NHS, there are 43 care commissioning groups, each of which have different guidelines as for the threshold for which they would refer you. So the threshold by which you would be eligible for NHS-funded IVF treatment. And so we looked at those who were trying to conceive, and nearly 70% of users were not eligible for NHS-funded IVF treatment. And that is because some of the funding eligibility criteria are that you don't have any previous children. Even if your partner has a child from a former marriage, it's not biologically yours, not eligible. That your BMI is of a certain, you have to have it under a certain amount, and that your AMH or that your FSH is at a certain level. And so we looked at people's AMH, their FSH, we looked at their BMI, we looked at their whether they have children or not. And it's amazing to think that those who are trying and struggling to conceive might wait those 12 months before going and seeing a specialist in the hopes that they would be referred. And in that 12 months that the time is of the essence, they would still never be eligible. So 65%, nearly 66% of these women had been trying to conceive for less than 12 months. So what we were trying to say is maybe they were waiting those 12 months. And for us, what we witnessed is that the earlier you know, the better informed you are, the better prepared you can be. Because the NHS does an incredible job, but what it cannot do is screen. It's not built to screen people prophylactically or to treat people just in case. It's there for people who seriously need help. And so GPs do an amazing job, but when somebody shows up and they don't have a prior history on that individual, then actually it's hard to know who really should be sent for treatment and who should modify their lifestyle in order to help themselves. The fourth reproductive revelation is that we treat all women the same when it comes to their reproductive health, and yet there are massive differences. So one thing that we wanted to ensure was that we had a very diverse data set, and we wanted to be able to stratify our data according to different types of women. Now, we know many various examples of where different ethnicities have different reactions. So they have different levels of AMH, they have different age by which, so if you are the quoted textbook age to go into menopause is 51, and it's 4 years earlier if you are from Southeast Asia. So that information quoting that the average age that you will go into menopause is 51 is not useful or helpful. In fact, it's quite dangerous information for somebody who's of a different origin, because what it means is that the onset of their symptoms may be earlier. And same with Black women. What we know is that the current statistics show that Black women don't do as well with IVF, so their success rates are lower and their birth rates are lower. And we wanted to see whether or not Black women approached testing services later than white women. And in fact, the data does mirror that. It shows that nearly 15% of Black women approached fertility after actively trying to conceive for 5 years. So they were waiting 5 years before approaching help, at an average age of 37 years. That's a long time to be trying to conceive before asking for help. And look at the difference in age. 9%, only 9% of women who approached fertility were trying to conceive for 5 years, but their average age was 33 years. So what are we doing to fail women that they are not getting enough information or support or encouragement or acknowledgement to receive testing and appropriate care so that they are better informed and can receive help much sooner? This is something that is an ongoing report. So our second report that we will launch will be all around how we can better support Black women, and all around better informing the data around individuals. So in total, this is just the beginning, but in total we have informed 213,000 people about their bodies, which is a staggering amount of people who've turned to us for better information. But almost 61% of people, nearly 62% of people who have done a test with fertility have found out that they have at least one hormone out of range, at least. Many of us are walking around with complete hormonal messes. And what's hard about that is when you look at the symptoms that are associated with hormone imbalance, they're very insidious. They are fatigue, weight gain, they are feeling, actually our top three symptoms are feeling tired, so fatigue, feeling irritable, and feeling cold. None of those would be something that people directly assume are to do with our hormones. And yet our data reflects that many of us do have underlying hormone and health issues. We just don't know it. So we're really proud to say that 44% of people nearly received a diagnosis through fertility. And this is something that we're really proud of, because we didn't just create a test and give people results, we gave people answers. And this is part of our mission, is to make change. And the way in which we do this is by talking to you and by going out into the streets. This was just part of the social change that we are creating at Fertility, that we are making it a bit more fun and engaging, making it about the people that we are building this for, which is us, it's our friends, it's our sisters, it's our daughters, it's our mums. And so I hope all of you will join us in this mother of all movements, and continue to support what we are doing at Fertility. And if anyone is interested in collaborating on our data, I am a very collaborative research scientist, and I would be more than happy to look at the research in the ways that you would want to interrogate the data set. I think the more eyes that look at this data, the more informed we become, because I will ask different questions of the data to other people. And I think there's so much more that we can do when we work together. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's lots of you still there. That's great. And I'm going to take just a couple of questions from anyone who's answering them. Somebody's asked about data sharing. Like I said, I'm more than happy to collaborate with people. To me, I view this as being a beautiful resource that we all need to benefit from, that we can use to better inform policy, that we can better inform clinical guidelines and get people a diagnosis sooner. Do you go? Thank you. Somebody's written a nice comment. So thank you for joining me. I'm going to stick around for any questions in case anyone's question shy. But I think we're at the beginning of a really exciting journey. If you want to collaborate with us, you can email our info account and they'll send it along. It's info@hertilityhealth.com. And we'd love to hear from you. We're really inviting this to be just kind of an open discussion, and also for people to share their stories with us. The more stories we share, the more we learn, and the more we can publish. But we will publish, but what we want to do is publish it to you guys first. A lot of people are asking how to get involved in a trial. Please do contact us. So part of our recruitment for our trials is to give us your blood, please. Do the health assessment. Again, best to email us. We actually do have a trial email, which I'll send in the email afterwards for anyone looking to be involved in some of our trials. We actually have a really amazing community of people who are so dedicated. They're saying, I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. I'm happy to share anything, and that's the best way of us learning. So somebody else has asked, what's the approach to make hormonal treatments more accessible through your platform outside of testing? So what we have done is, actually, I'm really glad you asked that. So we have, when we talk about the version 2, which is the longer health assessment, that has also been coupled up with a new report. So the report is so much more than a report. It's like a virtual clinic, and essentially you step inside the virtual clinic, and we have done huge systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and that means basically we've looked at, for every individual area, we've looked at all the published literature of scientific research on it. We then collated all of the data and said, is it effective? Is it not? And that's what it's said by systematically reviewing data sets. And what we have done is that for all of the hormones that we test, if you have a hormone that is out of range, be it either elevated or in deficit, we have looked at all of the data around 5 different key points. So we have said, what are the things that could cause somebody to have either an elevated or deficient hormone, either through their diet, through their lifestyle, through smoking or alcohol consumption, or exercise. So we know the different exercise, whether you're doing endurance training or whether you're doing resistance, actually alters your hormone profile differently. We've looked at lifestyle, diet, medications. A lot of medications can affect your hormones. So we wanted to take that into account so that we knew that if somebody had an out of range hormone, we could actually qualify that by saying, did you know that antidepressants or serotonin uptake inhibitors can affect your hormone profile, so that we actually were better, and we could nobody would be freaked out or left without answers about why their hormones might be out of range. And then we looked at reproductive conditions that we would expect that somebody's hormones would be out of range for that condition, but also non-reproductive conditions. There are many reproductive there are many non-reproductive conditions, like autoimmune conditions, that affect women in far more than they do men. And it's not known yet why it is that we are more affected by certain conditions. So we wanted to see whether those can have an effect on your hormones. So that has taken a very long time, and I am so grateful to my awesome research team that we essentially every week we spend our time looking into all of the literature and evidence for what are the things that could cause any one of your hormones that we've tested you to be either elevated or deficit, and through all of those different reasons, so that in your report we can say why, but also we can say what are the things that you can do potentially to change that, where possible, and where there is evidence for improving something. So maybe altering your diet for estrogen to see whether that can help, or changing your lifestyle around information that you've now received that actually is beneficial or could be detrimental to your hormones. So yeah, there are actionable insights that we've created are like a Bible of insights. Truthfully, I mean, we built this for ourselves. We are so excited to have this in our lives. I think we've all witnessed that we've become better informed about the different parts of our cycle and have changed our lifestyle factors and our behaviors and our nutrition as a result of that. So to me, it's an exciting way of us answering some unanswered questions too, eventually. Somebody has asked about our care pathways. Our care pathways are that you can either receive more testing. So for, as you know, it's a small vial, so we can test as many analytes as we can, usually up to 10. But if somebody needs to have their iron or vitamin D or any of the other profiles done, we can test them if their results in there are indicative of a nutritional imbalance. But also, so there's retesting. Then there's a fertility advisor call. So you can, if you just want a little bit of information about some of the routes to assisted conception or information about egg freezing, you can speak to our amazing fertility advisors. If you want to speak with a gynecologist, we have an awesome team of gynecologists who, as I mentioned before, are specialists in all sorts of gynecological health and fertility. And then another is if you're like, right, I have my answers, I know I need to be referred for fertility treatment. We work with a collection of really highly rated clinics that are highly rated on the HFEA, both in terms of their live birth outcomes, but also patient experiences. And so we can refer you to one of those clinics. So we're essentially holding your hand through that process, whether that's for fertility treatment or egg freezing. And then we also have a fertility counsellor. So we've got a lot of additional clinical services. Oh, we can also refer you for a scan. Nearly 47% of people who do the test are recommended to get a pelvic ultrasound scan. So we wanted to have that option available to people too, that they can get a physical scan to just either confirm a diagnosis or get better information about their bodies. Somebody's asked where we're based. We are based in the UK and Ireland for now. With more people's support, we will go global. More on how you can support us soon. So I'm trying to read through them. Everyone's come awake now asking the questions. Have I considered exploring the impact of impaired gut or vaginal microbiota on infertility, use of probiotics? Thank you for sharing this interesting data. Thanks, Alessia. We have looked at this. To me, I think the most valuable thing that we can do is view almost like a multi-omic approach to women's health. So there is a lot of information showing that vaginal, but also uterine bacteria is linked with infertility, and we know that there is porosity between the gut depending on the imbalance of estrogen deconjugating bacteria within your gut. And what that means is whether when your gut is lined with bacteria that deconjugate estrogen, it means that it creates kind of porosity. And what that means is that you get where you should have a clear barrier between your bowel and your uterus, that becomes that becomes less of a clear barrier when you have a gut dysbiosis or an imbalance in the number of healthy bacteria in your gut. So that is really important to also consider, not just probiotics, but also prebiotics. So you can take probiotics, but unless they have the environment by which to thrive, by take kefir, kombucha, all of the sourdough, those are the I guess the parts that give the environment for the good bacteria to grow. So yes, I definitely think about all of these things all of the time. Do I think the primary issue around delayed childbearing is that our bodies aren't adapting to catch up with society, or that society hasn't adapted to allow women to progress in our career while having children? As in, we worry that our careers will suffer. I think society hasn't adapted to us. It's actually, to me, the more I look at how our society is structured, and I view this now as a woman who's had a child, and the fear that I incorporated fertility when I was 3 months pregnant, and the fear that I had in trying to do everything, and knowing that maternity leave is confusing in itself, and that when I viewed going back to work after 9 months, I quite cavalierly said before, in my career-driven sense, oh, I'll be back, don't worry. And at 9 months postpartum, I held this tiny baby thinking, how can I leave this tiny human? How can I be without her? And I was actually so lucky that lockdown hit. And day one of lockdown was my day one of return to work. Now, I used my maternity to set up fertility and to really work on it, but it was frightening to me how unfair that is to expect women. And I couldn't afford to not go back to work. It wasn't something that I thought, like, I'm going to take a year or two. I couldn't afford to not go back to work. And I struggled so badly with what that would mean. And now I feel enraged at the system that expects us to continue working because we need to afford childcare, because we need to afford to live. And yet there are no provisions given to us to actually do these things. And then you tell women in their 30s when they haven't conceived and in their 40s, well, you know, I guess you missed the boat. And it's just this horrific narrative that we expect women to have careers, to have babies, to have time to exercise, meditate, freeze their eggs, do all these things, these expectations on women that are just so unrealistic that we can never win. You know, we now spend our careers working so we can afford to have children, only to find out we can't have children because we were trying to afford to have them, and then we can't afford to have IVF because, I don't know, it's just, yeah, I don't think our society has progressed. But I could definitely stay here all night. That is definitely a reproductive rant. What new policies do I hope to see implemented from our research? Well, I'm really hoping that we can introduce this on a government level, that we would introduce our effective triage to every patient so that we are helping primary care providers. We have spent a long time creating essentially a calculator for reproductive health so that we can collect all of the relevant pieces of information, embed them within something that gives somebody information to say, actually, this looks like this, and I'm going to test you appropriately for that. And what we've seen is that on average, 7-year diagnosis time for endometriosis needs to be much shorter. And should we pick out the individual warning signs sooner? Maybe we'll get people to care much sooner. And I think we really can. I think we really can do that. I think that's it. There's a few more questions, but I'm conscious of all of your time. And one thing I would love to know is if you felt this would be beneficial to you in terms of education. I am at my heart and soul is in education as a lecturer, and that's why we built out corporate benefits so that we could go into the workplace, educate women about their bodies, about their hormones, about fertility, about reproduction. The last one we gave, it was the men who asked all the questions, and one of them stood up at the end and he said, I have a wife and 2 daughters and I'm way too old to be learning this for the first time. And so hopefully if this is of interest to you, to invite us to your workplaces, to give these educational seminars, please do reach out to us for that. We have information on our website about our corporate benefits. I think the more people who are supported in the workplace, the better. At the end of the day, we can only work as hard as our hormones will let us. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us, and I really hope you stay with us on our mission. It's not been easy. It's an uphill battle, but we are so unbelievably moved by everybody's stories and the stories that we hear every day, and we are driven by the diagnoses and the changed lives that we have had throughout this time. So please do keep in touch and take care.